He eats McDonald's every single day. He drinks 5 cans of Coca-Cola before noon. He has never followed a fitness routine. He has never biohacked, never done cold plunges, never taken a stack of supplements. And at 95 years old, he just retired from running a $1.1 trillion company. With his mind completely intact, his judgment as sharp as ever, and a fortune of $148 billion still growing. And scientists who study brain aging and cognitive genetics say the reason Warren Buffett's brain has refused to decline is not luck, not diet. It goes straight into his DNA. Because the research on what protects a brain across 9 decades of life has produced some findings that will genuinely surprise you. And when you map those findings onto the specific life and genetics of Warren Buffett, from the boy who could add long columns of numbers in his head at age 6 to the 95-year-old who handed over the keys to a $1 trillion empire on his own terms, the genetic picture becomes almost impossible to ignore. Stay right here. And if this is the channel you come to for real science, real genetics, real biology, real stories behind the most extraordinary minds alive, subscribe right now. We publish this every single week. Hit that button and let's get into it. Warren Edward Buffett was born on August 30th, 1930, in Omaha, Nebraska. He was the second of 3 children and the only son of Howard Buffett and Layla Stahl Buffett. His father, Howard, ran a small stock brokerage and later served as a 4-term Republican congressman from Nebraska. His mother, Layla, was a homemaker who managed the family finances with careful discipline and was described by people who knew her as a frugal and resilient woman. She also struggled at points with severe emotional difficulties, according to accounts from Buffett's biographers, though she raised 3 children with strong values of self-reliance and responsibility. From the beginning, the home Warren Buffett grew up in was saturated in 2 things that would define his entire life: numbers and business. His father's brokerage was down the street from where young Warren spent his afternoons. He would sit in the customer's lounge, a place where investors waited while trades were placed, and watch the numbers on the blackboard. He was not dragged there. He chose to be there. He found it genuinely interesting in a way that most children his age found completely baffling. By age 6, he was selling Coca-Cola door to door, buying a 6-pack for 25 cents and selling each bottle for 5 cents, calculating his 20% profit on every transaction. He sold chewing gum. He sold golf balls. He delivered newspapers. By 13 years old, he filed his first tax return, claiming his bicycle as a $35 deduction because it was essential to his paper route income. 13 years old, filing a tax return and calculating a legitimate business deduction. His friends from childhood have described him as a mathematical prodigy who could add long columns of numbers in his head without paper or pencil. His senior yearbook picture caption from Woodrow Wilson High School reads, "Likes math, a future stockbroker." He wrote that himself. At 11 years old, Buffett made his first stock purchase. He bought 3 shares of City Service Preferred at $38 per share. The stock immediately dropped to $27. Most 11-year-olds, if they were somehow in this situation, would panic. Buffett waited. He had already, at 11, developed a level of patience around numbers and value that most adults never access in a lifetime. He held the stock until it rebounded to $40 and sold. He made $6 profit, and then he watched City Service climb all the way to nearly $200 per share. The lesson he took from that moment was one he would apply for the next 80 years. Patience, not cleverness, is the foundation of great investing. He applied to Harvard Business School. They rejected him. He went instead to Columbia Business School, specifically because a man named Benjamin Graham was teaching there. Graham was the author of The Intelligent Investor, the book Buffett had read, and called the best book on investing ever written. At Columbia, Buffett studied directly under Graham and received the only A+ Graham had ever given in his teaching career. The mentor was so impressed, he offered Buffett a job at his investment firm Graham Newman. Buffett returned to Omaha in 1956, started his own investment partnership with $105,000 raised from family and friends, and got to work. By 1962, Buffett's partnership was a millionaire enterprise. In 1965, he took control of a struggling textile manufacturer called Berkshire Hathaway and began using it as the vehicle for something much larger. He shut down the textile operations in 1985. And from that base, he built the most successful investment enterprise in the history of modern markets. Now let us look at the numbers, because they are important for understanding what his brain has been doing across 95 years of life. Berkshire Hathaway has delivered a compound annual gain in market value of approximately 19.8% since 1965. That is not a 10-year track record or a 20-year track record. That is 60 consecutive years of near 20% annual compounding. The S&P 500, which is already considered an extraordinarily strong benchmark, delivered approximately 10% annually over the same period. Berkshire delivered double that, sustained for 6 decades. That performance was not produced by a trading algorithm. It was not produced by a team of hundreds of analysts running models around the clock. It was produced in enormous part by one man sitting in an office in Omaha, Nebraska, reading annual reports. Buffett spends approximately 80% of his working day reading. He has described reading 500 to 1,000 pages per day as his primary activity since the early days of his career. He told CNBC, "That's how knowledge works. It builds up like compound interest. All of you can do it, but I guarantee not many of you will do it." He reads the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, USA Today, the Omaha World Herald, financial reports, annual reports from companies, and he has been doing this every single day for 70 years. The annual shareholder letters he writes for Berkshire Hathaway are studied by investors worldwide, not just for their financial insights, but as masterclasses in clarity of thought. He still lived, as of his retirement at the end of 2025, in the same house in Omaha that he purchased in 1958 for $31,500. He still stops at McDonald's for breakfast, 2 sausage patties or a sausage, egg, and cheese biscuit, chosen each morning depending on his mood, always washed down with a cherry Coca-Cola. He drinks 5 12-ounce Cokes every day. He told Fortune magazine in 2015, "I eat like a 6-year-old. If I eat 2,700 calories a day, a quarter of that is Coca-Cola. I do it every day." He snacks on nuts, potato sticks, and See's candies. For decades, he ate at Dairy Queen, a company Berkshire owns, ordering chili cheese dogs and ice cream sundaes. He has never been a gym person. He and his longtime business partner, Charlie Munger, who lived to 99, were openly amused by the idea of aggressive fitness routines. Buffett said at the 2025 annual shareholder meeting, the last one he would chair as CEO, "For 94 years, I've been able to drink what I want, do what I want, and I've defied all the predictions of what should have happened to me. Charlie and I never really exercised all that much. We were carefully preserving ourselves. He sleeps 8 hours a night. He goes to bed at 10:45 and wakes at 6:45. He does not rush his morning. He does not start meetings early. He protects his calendar from unnecessary obligations with a discipline that rivals his investment discipline. His schedule is built on one principle: do fewer things better. Read, think, decide, and do not let anything interrupt those 3 activities." At 95 years old, after 60 years running one of the most complex and valuable enterprises on earth, he announced his retirement on his own terms, to a room full of shareholders who gave him a standing ovation in full possession of his mind. He had decided when to go. He had chosen his successor, Greg Abel, and groomed him carefully. And his final shareholder letter urged investors not to focus on money but on kindness. "Be kind," he wrote, "and the world is better off." This is a brain that refused to age on the timeline that biology demands for most people. And the science of why has a genetic explanation that is extraordinary. Let us talk about the APOE gene, because this is the most important piece of genetics in this entire story, and it is directly relevant to what has happened in Warren Buffett's brain across 9 decades of life. APOE stands for apolipoprotein E. It is a gene that produces a protein involved in cholesterol transport throughout the body, including in the brain. It comes in 3 main forms: APOE2, APOE3, and APOE4. Every person carries 2 copies of this gene, 1 from each parent. The combination you inherit determines your genetic risk profile for brain aging, and the differences between the 3 versions are some of the most dramatic in all of human genetics. APOE4 is the strongest known genetic risk factor for late-onset Alzheimer's disease. People who carry 1 copy of APOE4 have 2 to 3 times the average risk of developing Alzheimer's. People who carry 2 copies, 1 from each parent, have 8 to 12 times the risk. Research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2024, analyzing data from over 320,000 participants, one of the largest studies ever conducted, confirmed that APOE4 homozygous carriers showed measurably greater cognitive decline with aging and smaller hippocampi and amygdala volumes compared to APOE3 carriers. APOE2 tells the opposite story. Research published in May 2026 from the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, published in the journal Aging Cell, identified the precise molecular mechanism behind APOE2's protective effects. Scientists found that APOE2 helps human neurons keep their DNA intact and resist becoming senescent, which is the damaged, dysfunctional state that cells enter when they age. When the research teams stressed neurons with radiation and chemical agents, APOE2 neurons showed lower levels of senescence markers, better preserved nuclear architecture, and significantly less DNA damage signaling compared to neurons with the APOE3 or APOE4 variants. The researchers from the Buck Institute stated directly, "We've known for years that APOE2 carriers tend to live longer and have a lower risk of Alzheimer's. But the protective mechanism has been a black box by showing that APOE alleles also tune how neurons defend their genome. And this study connects a major longevity gene to 2 of the most actively studied hallmarks of aging. Research from long-lived human population studies, including the Long Life Family Study and the New England Centenarian Study, has confirmed that carriers of the APOE2 homozygous genotype show a significantly slower rate of cognitive decline with aging compared to carriers of other genotypes. People who live to very advanced ages with their cognition intact, the superagers, the centenarians, who still read and think and engage at 95 and beyond, are disproportionately represented among APOE2 carriers. We do not have access to Warren Buffett's personal genetic profile, but here is what the documented evidence of his life tells us. He is 95 years old. His brain has shown no documented signs of cognitive decline. He has been making complex, multi-billion-dollar investment decisions in public for 60 consecutive years, and he retired on his own terms after choosing his own successor at his own pace. Everything about his cognitive trajectory, the sustained sharpness, the continued capacity for complex reasoning, the complete absence of decline, is consistent with a brain that carries protective genetic architecture for cognitive aging, the kind of architecture that the APOE2 research describes. Now here is something that almost nobody is including in this story, and it connects the genetics to the most concrete feature of Buffett's daily routine. His father, Howard Buffett, was, by the accounts of everyone who wrote about the family, a man of exceptional intellectual sharpness and integrity, a stockbroker who became a congressman, a man who was described by his son in many interviews as the greatest human being he had ever known. Howard Buffett died in 1964 at 60 years old, relatively young by modern standards, but he was, until his death, mentally fully engaged with the world. Warren's mother, Layla, lived into her 80s. The heritability of cognitive longevity, the tendency to maintain sharp brain function at advanced ages, has been studied extensively. Research from the New England Centenarian Study found that exceptional longevity runs strongly in families. First-degree relatives of centenarians are significantly more likely to reach advanced age with their cognition preserved compared to the general population. The specific genetic variants driving this family pattern include, most prominently, the APOE gene cluster, along with other variants related to DNA repair efficiency, inflammation control, and cellular stress response. These are inherited. They come from parents. They are expressed differently in different individuals, but the family pattern is real, and the genetic research confirms it. Warren Buffett inherited his extraordinary financial mind from a father who was himself sharp, financially engaged, and deeply principled. He grew up in an environment that treated thinking as the primary activity of daily life. He came into the world with a genetic profile that, based on everything his 95 years of documented cognitive output tells us, appears to have been built for exceptional brain longevity. There's a second layer to the genetics here that is even more fascinating, and it connects directly to the specific thing Buffett does every day that his brain needs most. The scientific research on cognitive aging consistently identifies one activity above all others as the most reliable protector of brain function across a lifetime: deep, sustained, complex intellectual engagement. Not puzzles, not memory games. Deep engagement with genuinely complex, novel information, the kind that requires the brain to build new connections between existing knowledge structures, to hold multiple scenarios in mind simultaneously, and to evaluate them against each other with patience. This is what reading 500 pages a day does. This is what studying a company's annual report cover to cover, including all the footnotes, does to a brain. This is what playing bridge, which Buffett does regularly and has called the best exercise there is for the brain, does to a brain. Research on neuroplasticity has confirmed that sustained, complex cognitive activity promotes what scientists call cognitive reserve, the brain's accumulated resilience against age-related damage. People with higher cognitive reserve show fewer symptoms of cognitive decline, even when the physical signs of aging are present in the brain. The brain that has been heavily used in complex and demanding ways across many decades appears to build a structural buffer against decline that brains without that sustained engagement do not develop. Buffett said it himself, "I just sit in my office and read all day." He described the compounding of knowledge over time exactly the way he describes the compounding of money. Knowing a lot about what I've always been fascinated with, and I've been doing it since I was young, it's enormously valuable. The content of what he reads is less important than the depth and consistency with which he reads it. He has been exercising his brain in the same demanding way every single day for 70 years. The result, at 95, is a brain that has been built up year after year into a structure with far more resilience than a brain that has been used at average intensity. The genetics provides the foundation, the APOE and related longevity-associated variants that protect neurons from DNA damage and cellular senescence. The daily practice of deep reading provides the epigenetic activation, the behavioral signals that tell those genes to keep doing their protective work. Both together produce something the world may not see again for a very long time. There is one more piece of this story that completes the picture, and it connects genetics to something that neuroscientists call emotional stability, or in more precise research terms, low neuroticism. which has been independently identified as one of the strongest predictors of healthy cognitive aging. Warren Buffett does not worry. This is not a casual statement. It is something that people who have known him across decades consistently report. He sleeps 8 hours a night regardless of what the market is doing. He told shareholders during the worst moments of the 2008 financial crisis that he was sleeping fine. During the COVID crash of March 2020, when Berkshire's holdings lost enormous paper value in days, he did not panic. He was patient. He was calm. He was confident that the long-term direction of the U.S. economy was upward, and he waited. The neuroscience of this kind of emotional regulation is documented and significant. Research has found that people who maintain low chronic stress across their lifetimes show measurably better brain aging outcomes, lower rates of neurodegeneration, slower telomere shortening in brain cells, and lower levels of inflammatory markers associated with cognitive decline. Chronic stress produces cortisol, the stress hormone, and sustained high cortisol is directly toxic to the hippocampus, the brain region most critical for memory and for the kind of pattern recognition that Buffett uses every day to evaluate businesses. People who spend decades worrying, living in a state of chronic low-level cortisol elevation, are literally damaging the brain structure they need most. Buffett does not do this. His emotional regulation is, by every documented account, extraordinary. And the capacity for emotional regulation, the ability to maintain calm in the face of significant uncertainty, is itself heritable. Research in behavioral genetics estimates the heritability of neuroticism, which is the inverse of emotional stability, at between 40 and 60%. Low neuroticism, Buffett's defining emotional trait, tends to run in families and is shaped by genetic variants influencing serotonin function, cortisol response, and the structural development of the prefrontal cortex. Howard Buffett, by every description, was a man of deep moral certainty and calm conviction. His son inherited not just his fascination with business and numbers, but the same emotional stability that allowed both men to hold their convictions patiently against the noise of the world. Let us also look at something that gets overlooked in most coverage of Buffett's extraordinary cognitive longevity: the nature of the decisions he was still making in his 90s, at a level that most working-age CEOs could not match. In 2016, at age 85, Buffett began buying Apple stock, a technology company he had avoided for decades, calling it outside his circle of competence. By 2023, Apple had become Berkshire's single largest holding, representing over 40% of the equity portfolio at its peak. The decision to enter Apple at 85, understand its business model deeply enough to commit billions to it, and hold it through massive market volatility, that is not the behavior of a declining mind. That is the behavior of a mind with the flexibility to update its own models, the discipline to act only when conviction is complete, and the patience to hold when others sell. In 2020, at age 89, during the depths of the COVID pandemic crash, Buffett chose not to deploy Berkshire's massive cash reserves while markets were falling sharply, a decision that attracted criticism from many analysts who expected him to make bold acquisitions. He was patient. He waited. And then, when conditions warranted, Berkshire made major investments in Occidental Petroleum and Japanese trading companies, positions that generated billions in returns. The timing and the thinking were as precise as anything he had produced at 40 or 50. In 2024, at age 93, he reduced Berkshire's massive Apple position by more than half, taking profits at exactly the right time, before the broader market began questioning tech valuations. Critics initially questioned the decision. Subsequent events validated it completely. At 93, he was still reading the market more accurately than the collective wisdom of analysts decades younger. This is the specific documented evidence that his brain was functioning at an exceptional level, not just socially, not just conversationally, but in the domain of complex probabilistic reasoning under uncertainty, the exact cognitive function most vulnerable to aging-related decline. The fact that it was still operating at the highest level at 93 and 94 is not explained by lifestyle alone. It is explained by the genetic foundation that built and protected the brain doing that reasoning across 9 decades. Warren Buffett turned 95 years old on August 30th, 2025. 6 weeks later, at the annual shareholder meeting he had run for 55 years, he announced that he would step down as CEO at the end of the year. He named Greg Abel as his successor. He told the room full of investors he had served for 6 decades that the company's culture, values, and long-term orientation were safe. He then spent November writing his final pre-retirement shareholder letter, a document in which he urged people, above all else, to be kind. He donated $6 billion of Berkshire Hathaway stock to charity in June 2025, his largest single annual donation in his life. His total charitable giving has now exceeded $65 billion, money given mostly to the Gates Foundation, the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, and his 3 children's charitable organizations. If he had kept every share he ever donated instead of giving it away, his net worth would exceed $200 billion today. He chose otherwise. He still lives in the house he bought in 1958. He still drinks 5 Cokes a day. He still thinks in terms of decades, not quarters. And his brain, at 95, still works. The genetics of brain aging tells us why some people arrive at the end of a very long life with their minds preserved and their thinking intact. The APOE2 longevity gene protects neurons from DNA damage and cellular senescence at the molecular level. The heritability of emotional stability and cognitive resilience runs through family lines in ways that population genetics now confirms with precision. The behavioral practice of deep, complex, sustained intellectual engagement, reading 500 pages a day for 7 decades, provides the epigenetic activation that tells the brain's protective genes to keep working. Warren Buffett is not just an exceptional investor. He is one of the most extraordinary documented cases of human cognitive longevity in modern history. A brain that started calculating profits on Coca-Cola bottles at age 6, that bought its first stock at 11, that read Benjamin Graham at 19 and understood him completely. That spent 60 years reading, thinking, and compounding, and arrived at 95 with the same essential clarity it had at the beginning. The DNA was the foundation. The decades of reading were the construction. And what was built, across 95 years in a modest house in Omaha, Nebraska, is something the world's biology rarely produces. If you made it all the way through this video, you are exactly who this channel is built for. Real genetics, real science, real biology behind the most extraordinary people who have ever lived. Every week, we go this deep into a new story. Subscribe right now so you're here for the next one. Drop a name in the comments. Tell us whose brain you want us to study next. The next story might be the most surprising one yet. Thank you for watching. The brain never lies, and the DNA that built this one is something science is only now beginning to fully understand.